The breath on her neck smelled of stale whiskey and old bruises. Derek was closing in. Panic, cold and sharp, forced Harper forward until she collided with a wall of bespoke wool and quiet danger. Elias Mercer didn't flinch. Instead, his hand slid to her waist, a heavy territorial weight that stopped her ex dead in his tracks. In that single, calculated touch, Harper realized she had traded a monster for a devil. And heaven help her, she didn't want to run. The air inside the rookery always tasted like copper and expensive cigars. It was an underground casino that pretended to be a private gentleman's club, nestled in the damp basement of a derelict financial district building. Harper hated it here. She hated the velvet walls that absorbed the sounds of desperate men losing their life savings. She hated the low, amber lighting designed to blur the passage of time. Most of all, she hated the uniform. A black corset dress that cut too low and rode too high, designed to make her look like an object, a fixture, a distraction. But the tips paid in cash, and cash couldn't be tracked. Cash meant a bus ticket out of the city by the end of the month. Harper balanced a silver tray, loaded with 4 glasses of neat scotch. Her heels clicked a steady rhythm against the hardwood floor. Keep your head down. Don't make eye contact with the players. Smile if addressed, but never linger. Those were the rules she lived by for the past 3 weeks. It was a survival routine, and Harper was nothing if not a survivor. She dropped off the drinks at a high-stakes baccarat table, nodding politely at a man who shoved a $100 chip onto her tray without looking at her. She turned, slipping the chip into the concealed pocket of her apron. Then she saw him. The casino floor seemed to tilt. The ambient noise of clinking ice and low murmurs dissolved into a high-pitched ringing in her ears. Standing near the coat check, arguing with the bouncer, was Derek. He looked exactly the same tailored leather jacket she had bought him for his birthday 2 years ago, the same aggressive, leaning posture he adopted whenever he wasn't getting his way, the same slight twitch in his jaw that meant he was a hair's breadth away from violence. Harper's lungs seized. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the empty silver tray until her knuckles turned white. How did he find me? She had changed her number. She had abandoned her apartment, leaving behind everything she couldn't fit into a single duffel bag. She had paid off the landlord to say she moved out of state. But Derek was a tracker dog with a bruised ego. He didn't hunt because he loved her. He hunted because she belonged to him, and Derek didn't let anyone take his property. She watched as the bouncer, a mountain of a man named Finn, shook his head. Derek slipped a thick envelope from his inner pocket and pressed it into Finn's massive palm. Finn glanced down, hesitated, and stepped aside. Derek scanned the room. His eyes were dark, manic. Harper retreated. She stepped backward, melting into the shadows cast by a large mahogany pillar. Her mind raced, flipping through escape routes. The front door was out. The service elevator required a keycard she didn't have. The kitchen exits were monitored by the pit boss, who would fire her on the spot if she abandoned her shift. And worse, he might just hand her over to Derek to avoid a scene. She was trapped. Derek began moving through the tables, his gaze cutting through the smoke-filled air. He was looking at the waitresses. He knew she was here. Harper backed up further, her shoulders hitting the heavy velvet drapes that lined the VIP section. The VIP booths were elevated, semicircular leather arrangements reserved for the kind of men who didn't just play with money. They played with lives. Derek was 20 feet away, 15. He shoved a patron out of the way. The patron turned to snap at him, but Derek just bared his teeth, a silent, unhinged threat that made the other man back down. 10 feet. Harper couldn't breathe. The phantom ache of a cracked rib throbbed in her side, a parting gift from their last argument. She needed a shield. She needed a wall. She turned her head and looked into the VIP booth directly behind her. Sitting alone at a sprawling table meant for 6 was Elias Mercer. Harper knew who he was. Everyone in the city knew who he was, even if they pretended they didn't. Elias wasn't a loud, flashy gangster. He didn't wear gold chains or drive neon sports cars. He was old money wrapped in razor wire. He wore charcoal suits that cost more than Harper's college tuition. He had dark, neatly trimmed hair, a jawline carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter ocean. He was currently rolling a silver Zippo lighter between his long, scarred fingers. He wasn't watching the casino floor. He seemed entirely bored with his surroundings. Derek spotted her. "Harper!" Derek yelled, the sound cutting through the polite hum of the room. It was a bark of ownership. Panic, cold and sharp, overrode Harper's common sense. She didn't think about the rumors. She didn't think about the bodies that allegedly paved Elias Mercer's rise to power. She only knew that Derek was a monster she understood, and Elias was a devil that terrified even the monsters. She spun around, slipped past the velvet rope, and walked straight into the VIP booth. Harper didn't hesitate. If she stopped to think, her legs would give out. She slid into the booth right next to Elias Mercer. She didn't sit respectfully at the edge. She crowded to him, pressing her thigh against his, leaning into his space. The scent of him washed over her. Cedarwood, expensive tobacco, and something distinctly cold. Elias didn't flinch. The silver lighter stopped moving between his knuckles. He slowly turned his head, his icy blue eyes locking onto hers. Up close, the lethal stillness of the man was suffocating. He didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't demand she leave. He simply observed her, a predator assessing an erratic bird that had just flown directly into his cage. "Please," Harper breathed, her voice barely a whisper. She looked down at the table, pretending to study his Scotch glass. "My ex. He's behind me. Please, just for a minute. Let him think I'm with you." Elias said nothing. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire. Heavy footsteps approached the booth. "Get up, Harper." Derek's voice was right behind her, dripping with a venomous mix of relief and rage. He had found his stray. Now it was time for the punishment. Harper's body betrayed her. A violent shiver racked her spine. She kept her eyes glued to Elias's Scotch glass, terrified that if she looked at Derek, she would shatter. "I said get up!" Derek snapped, his voice rising. He reached out, his hand grasping Harper's bare shoulder. His fingers dug into her flesh, sharp and bruising. "You think you can run from me? You're making a scene. Let's go." He yanked her backward. Harper gasped, stumbling slightly in the booth. Before Derek could pull her completely away, a hand clamped down on Harper's waist. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a heavy, possessive anchor. The grip was absolute iron, burning through the thin fabric of her uniform. With a single, effortless motion, Elias pulled her back down into the booth, flush against his side. Derek stumbled forward, the sudden resistance throwing him off balance. He looked up, his face flushed with anger, ready to tear the head off whoever had dared to interrupt him. "Hey, buddy, back the hell—" Derek's sentence died in his throat. Elias Mercer slowly leaned forward, bringing his face into the amber light. He didn't let go of Harper's waist. In fact, his thumb moved just a fraction, tracing the curve of her hip bone, a casual territorial claim that made the air in the booth turn to ice. Elias didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just stared at Derek. "You're interrupting my conversation," Elias said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that didn't carry past the booth, but struck with the force of a physical blow. Derek's face drained of color. The flush of anger vanished, replaced by a sickly, chalky white. His eyes darted from Elias's face to the hand resting casually on Harper's waist. He recognized the man. Any bottom feeder with half a brain knew not to cross a Mercer. She... Derek stammered, his bravado crumbling like dry leaves. He took a physical step back, his hands rising defensively. "She's my girl. She stole from me. I'm just taking her home." Elias tilted his head slightly, a micro-expression of absolute disdain. "She is sitting with me," Elias replied smoothly. "Which means she is not your girl, and she is certainly not going home with you." Derek swallowed hard. He looked at Harper. For a fleeting second, Harper saw the old Derek, the violent, vindictive man who would make her pay for this humiliation later. But that look was quickly buried under the crushing weight of self-preservation. Derek wasn't willing to die over her. "Right," Derek muttered, his voice shaking. "Right, my mistake. Didn't know she was running with your crowd, Mr. Mercer. Sorry for the disturbance." He didn't wait for a dismissal. Derek turned and bolted, practically shoving his way through the casino patrons to get to the exit. Harper sat frozen. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. She watched Derek disappear through the heavy brass doors of the club. He was gone. He had actually walked away. The suffocating terror that had gripped her chest began to recede, replaced by a dizzying wave of relief. She let out a long, shaky breath, her eyes closing briefly. She was safe. She had done it. Then she felt the hand on her waist flex. Harper's eyes snapped open. She turned her head. Elias Mercer was looking at her. The icy blue eyes were no longer bored. They were sharp, calculating. He was studying her face, taking in the bruised exhaustion under her eyes, the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. The monster was gone, but she was still sitting in the devil's lap. "He's gone," Harper whispered, her throat dry. "I can see that," Elias said. She shifted, expecting him to release her so she could stand up, apologize, and scurry back to her shift. The hand on her waist didn't move. It remained planted, an immovable object. The heat of his palm seemed to sear through her skin, spreading a strange, unsettling warmth up her spine. "You can let go now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. She didn't want to sound ungrateful, but the physical proximity to this man was setting off every alarm bell in her head. Elias finally moved his hand, but not to release her. He reached up, his knuckles brushing against her cheek as he caught a stray lock of her hair, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was terrifyingly gentle. "You misunderstood the transaction, little bird," Elias murmured. Harper stiffened. The nickname wasn't spoken with affection. It was a classification. She was small, she was cornered, and she had flown into his snare. "Transaction?" she repeated, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. She couldn't show fear. Men like Derek fed on fear. Men like Elias Mercer likely weaponized it. "I asked for a favor. I didn't realize there was a ledger." A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of Elias's mouth. He withdrew his hand from her hair, but kept his left arm draped across the back of the booth, trapping her. "There is always a ledger," he said quietly. He picked up his scotch glass, taking a slow sip. "In my world, sanctuary is the most expensive commodity on the market. You don't just borrow my name to scare away a street thug and walk away clean." Harper's jaw clenched. The cynical reality of her life crashed back down on her. Nothing was ever free. She had traded one form of captivity for another. "I don't have money," she said bluntly. "I serve drinks to people who lose more in an hour than I make in a year. If you want cash, you backed the wrong horse." "If I wanted cash, I would have let him drag you out of here and collected on the debt he likely owes my bookies," Elias replied, setting the glass down. He turned slightly, giving her his full attention. The weight of his gaze was physical. "I have enough money." "Then what do you want?" "To understand the investment." Elias leaned closer. The scent of cedarwood enveloped her again. "Who was he?" "My ex-boyfriend," Harper said, keeping her answers clipped. "Why is he hunting you in a place like this?" "Because I left him." She swallowed, her throat tight. "Because I hid. Because he thinks he owns me." Elias absorbed the information. He looked at the bruising grip marks Derek had left on her bare shoulder. His expression remained unreadable, but a fractional tightening of his jaw betrayed a shift in his thoughts. "And your name?" he asked softly. "Harper." "Well, Harper," Elias said, testing the syllables on his tongue. He finally dropped his arm from the back of the booth, granting her an inch of breathing room. "You have a problem. Your ex walked out of here believing you belong to me. Men like him are cowards, but cowards talk. By tomorrow morning, the street will know that Elias Mercer has a new interest." Harper felt the blood drain from her face. No, you can't let them think that. That puts a target on my back. You put a target on your own back the second you slid into my booth. Elias corrected her smoothly. "You used my reputation as a shield. Now you have to wear it." "I don't even know you!" Harper protested, keeping her voice low so the passing waitresses wouldn't hear. "I work here. I'm leaving the city in 2 weeks. I just needed him to back off tonight." "He won't back off," Elias stated, a cold matter-of-factness in his tone. "He'll wait. He'll watch. If he realizes this was a bluff, if he realizes I have no claim on you, he will kill you for embarrassing him. You know I'm right." Harper closed her eyes. The horrible, crushing truth was that Elias was entirely correct. Derek's pride was his most dangerous asset. Humiliating him in front of Elias Mercer wouldn't deter him forever. It would only make him more vicious when he realized it was a trick. "So what do I do?" she asked, the fight bleeding out of her. "You play the hand you dealt," Elias said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card. He slid it across the table toward her. "You finish your shift. When you clock out, there will be a black car waiting for you in the alley. My driver will take you to an apartment. It's secure. You will sleep there tonight." Harper stared at the card. It had no name, just a 10-digit phone number. "I can't go with you," she whispered. "I won't be another man's property. I'd rather take my chances with Derek." Elias stopped. For the first time, a genuine flicker of emotion crossed his face, a dark, dangerous flash of irritation. He leaned in so close she could feel the heat of his breath. "Do not mistake me for that trash you were running from," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with an intensity that made her shiver. "I don't claim property, Harper. I deal in loyalty. You asked for my protection. I am giving it to you. But if you walk out of those doors alone tonight, whatever happens to you is on your own head. I will not step in twice." He sat back, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke suit as if the conversation was already over. "The car will be waiting until 2 a.m. Your choice." Elias didn't look at her again. He picked up his lighter, resuming the slow, hypnotic roll between his knuckles. Harper sat there for a long moment, staring at the side of his face. He was arrogant, commanding, and utterly terrifying. But as her shoulder throbbed where Derek had grabbed her, she realized one inescapable fact. When Elias Mercer had put his hand on her waist, he hadn't left a bruise. With trembling fingers, Harper reached across the table and picked up the black card. She slid it into her apron pocket, right next to the $100 chip, and stood up. She smoothed down the front of her uniform, turned her back on the devil, and walked back to the casino floor. She had 3 hours until her shift ended. 3 hours to decide if selling her soul was worth saving her life. The alley behind the rookery smelled of rotting produce and wet asphalt. At 2:05 a.m., Harper pushed through the heavy steel exit door, the night air hitting her face like a damp towel. She clutched her duffel bag, retrieved from her locker, tightly to her chest. An idling engine hummed in the shadows. It was a black Lincoln Continental. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the rear passenger door clicked open the moment her boots hit the pavement. Harper hesitated. The street lamp flickered above her, casting long, wavering shadows. If she got in that car, she was crossing a line she could never uncross. If she walked away, she would be looking over her shoulder for Derek until the paranoia drove her insane, or until he finally caught her. She climbed in. The door shut with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud, cutting off the sounds of the city. The interior smelled of clean leather and the faint, lingering ghost of cedar wood. Elias wasn't in the car. The driver, a broad-shouldered man with a thick neck and a flat cap, didn't look at her in the rearview mirror. "Buckle up, miss," he said. His voice was gravel, flat and devoid of curiosity. Harper complied, her hands shaking slightly as she clicked the seatbelt into place. The drive took 20 minutes. They didn't head toward the sprawling estates in the hills where the old money lived. Instead, they drove deep into the newly gentrified waterfront district. The car pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a sleek, glass-fronted high-rise. The driver escorted her to a private elevator, swiped a key fob, and hit the button for the penthouse. "Mr. Mercer will be by tomorrow," the driver said as the doors slid shut, leaving her alone. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. Harper stepped out, her worn sneakers soundless against the polished concrete floors. The space was massive, cold, and meticulously curated. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping, panoramic view of the city skyline, the lights glittering like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The furniture was all sharp angles and muted colors, slate gray, charcoal, stark white. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a showroom. It looked like a cage. Harper found the master bedroom. She didn't turn on the lights. She simply dropped her duffel bag on the floor, kicked off her shoes, and crawled on top of the immaculate, high-thread count duvet in her clothes. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the adrenaline to fade. It took hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt Derek's fingers bruising her shoulder. Then, the memory would shift, replaced by the heavy, immovable heat of Elias's hand on her waist. She fell asleep just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. She woke to the smell of black coffee. Harper bolted upright, disoriented. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11 a.m. Panic flared in her chest, sharp and familiar. She scrambled off the bed, her muscles aching, and crept towards the living room. Elias was sitting at the kitchen island. He was out of his tailored suit, wearing a black crewneck sweater pushed up to his forearms and dark trousers. It made him look less like a CEO and more like a soldier. He was reading a tablet, a steaming mug of coffee resting near his elbow. Another mug sat on the opposite side of the marble counter. "Drink," Elias said, not looking up from his screen. Harper crossed the room defensively. She didn't sit. She picked up the mug, letting the heat seep into her cold palms. "You didn't have to break in." "I own the building, Harper. I don't break in," Elias replied, finally turning off the tablet. He met her gaze. His eyes were just as cold in the daylight. "Did you sleep?" "Well enough." She took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, bitter, exactly how she needed it. "What are the rules?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Rules? Don't play dumb. I'm a stray you picked up off the casino floor." Harper gripped the mug tighter. "I know how this works. I stay here. I don't leave without permission. I look pretty when you have company, and I keep my mouth shut. Right?" Elias looked at her for a long, quiet moment. The silence was heavier than any shouting match she'd ever had with Derek. "You survived your ex by anticipating his abuse," Elias said softly, leaning forward. "Do not project him onto me. You are here because a street rat with a bruised ego will kill you to prove a point. You can leave this apartment whenever you want. The elevator requires a fob, which is on the counter. There is a panic button on the keys. If you press it, my men will arrive in 3 minutes." Harper stared at the small black fob resting near the fruit bowl. She felt a sudden, disorienting rush of vertigo. She was bracing for a wall, and he had simply opened a door. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you asked me to," Elias said simply. He stood up. He was taller than she remembered, his presence filling the sterile kitchen. "And because I despise men who use fear to leash women." He walked past her, headed for the elevator. "Elias!" she called out. It was the first time she had used his first name. It felt strange on her tongue. Heavy. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "What do I do all day?" she asked, gesturing to the massive, empty apartment. "Whatever you like," he said. "But tonight, Wear something formal. I'll send a car at 8. The city needs to see the lie to believe it. By day 4, the silence of the penthouse was driving Harper insane. She was a creature of motion. For the past 2 years, survival meant running, working double shifts, counting pennies, and constantly looking over her shoulder. Sitting in a leather chair, staring at the harbor, felt like waiting for an execution. She had gone to the grocery store twice, accompanied by a silent shadow named Miller, the driver from the first night. Miller stayed 10 paces behind her, never interfering, just watching. It made Harper feel radioactive. When the sun set on Friday, the black car arrived. Harper wore a dress she found hanging in the closet. It was a deep emerald green, silk, and fit her with terrifying precision. It draped off her shoulders and clung to her hips, elegant but entirely modest compared to her casino uniform. She left her hair down, letting the natural waves frame her face, and applied the minimal makeup she owned. The car took her to a private gallery opening in the arts district. Elias was waiting by the entrance. He wore a dark navy suit that absorbed the flashing lights of the hired photographers outside the venue. When he saw her, his eyes did a slow, clinical sweep of her body. There was no leer, no predatory hunger. It was an assessment. She passed. "Smile," he murmured as she approached. He offered his arm. Harper took it, her fingers curling around the expensive fabric of his sleeve. Beneath the suit, his arm was solid rock. They walked into the gallery. The air was thick with the scent of champagne, expensive perfume, and old money. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a current. Elias Mercer was a man who moved in the shadows. Bringing a woman into the light was a statement. "Keep your head up," Elias instructed quietly, leading her toward a group of men in tuxedos. "You don't belong beneath them. You belong next to me." Harper forced her chin up. She plastered on the polite, vacant smile she used at the rookery. The next 2 hours were a blur of introductions to politicians, union bosses, and wealthy socialites. Elias didn't introduce her as his girlfriend, nor did he explain who she was. He simply said, "This is Harper," and left the rest to their imaginations. The power he wielded was palpable. Men deferred to him. Women looked at her with a toxic mixture of envy and pity. Halfway through the evening, they found themselves cornered near a massive abstract sculpture by a city councilman who had had too much scotch. He was sweating, his eyes darting to Harper's chest entirely too often. "Elias, my boy," the councilman slurred, leaning in. "Always a pleasure. And who is this lovely creature? You've been hiding her." "Harper," Elias said flatly. "Harper," the councilman repeated, reaching out to grab her hand. His palm was damp. "A beautiful name for a beautiful girl. Tell me, what do you do?" Harper froze. She didn't know what the cover story was. She looked up at Elias, panic flaring in her eyes. Before the councilman could press his wet lips to her knuckles, Elias moved. He stepped slightly in front of Harper, breaking the man's grip on her hand. At the same time, Elias's hand slid around her back, his large palm settling firmly flat against her waist. It was the exact same touch from the casino. Heavy, grounding, absolute. "She's with me, Arthur," Elias said. The volume of his voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "That is what she does." The councilman blinked, the alcohol fog parting just enough for him to recognize the danger in Elias's eyes. He took a hasty step back. "Of course, my apologies. Lovely to meet you, my dear." He scurried away toward the bar. Harper let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Elias didn't drop his hand. His fingers flexed against the silk of her dress. "You don't have to freeze," Elias murmured, leaning down so his mouth was near her ear. "If someone makes you uncomfortable, you tell them to back off. If they don't, I will." Harper looked up at him. "I'm not used to having a shield." "Get used to it," he said. He began to guide her through the crowd again, his hand remaining on her waist. The touch was performative, meant for the watchful eyes of the room, But it didn't feel fake to Harper. It felt like a tether keeping her from floating away. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like prey. She felt protected, and that terrified her more than anything. Dependence was a trap. She had relied on Derek once, and it had cost her everything. Relying on Elias Mercer, a man who commanded violence with a whisper, was a different kind of suicide. When they finally returned to the car, the silence between them was thick. "You played your part well," Elias said as the city lights flashed over his face. "I'm a good liar," Harper replied, staring out the window. "Is that what this is to you? What else would it be?" She turned to face him. Her cynicism was her armor, and she strapped it on tightly. "You need a prop to show the city you have a soft side, or a weakness, or whatever game you're playing. I need a bodyguard. It's a transaction. You said it yourself." Elias stared at her in the dim light of the back seat. The muscle in his jaw ticked. "You're very determined to keep me in a box, Harper," he said quietly. "A transaction, a monster, a devil, whatever makes it easier for you to sleep at night." He looked away, staring out his own window. He didn't speak to her for the rest of the ride. The illusion of safety shattered on a Tuesday. Harper was in the penthouse kitchen, attempting to cook a meal for herself just to pass the time, when her burner phone vibrated on the counter. It was a cheap, prepaid piece of plastic she used to text her only friend, a waitress from the Rookery named Sarah. Harper picked it up. There was a single text message: "I know where you sleep." The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble counter. Derek. He hadn't backed down. He had been digging. He must have followed Sarah or threatened her to get the new number. And if he had the number, it was only a matter of time before he found the building. Harper couldn't breathe. The walls of the penthouse suddenly felt like they were closing in. The panoramic view wasn't a luxury. It was a glass display case. She was trapped in the sky. She lunged for the panic button on the key fob. She pressed it, holding it down until her thumb ached. 3 minutes later, the private elevator dinged. Miller stepped out, his hand resting casually inside his jacket. He took one look at Harper, pale and shaking by the counter, and crossed the room in 3 strides. He saw the phone. "Pack a bag, 10 minutes, Miller ordered. "Where are we going?" Harper gasped. "A secondary location. Mr. Mercer's orders for a breach." Harper didn't argue. She ran to the bedroom, throwing her few clothes into her duffel bag. When she returned, Miller was speaking quietly into an earpiece. His face was carved from stone. They left the building through a service exit, taking a different car, an unassuming silver sedan. They drove out of the city, heading north toward the dense, wooded hills. For 2 days, Harper sat in a fortified cabin in the middle of nowhere. Miller paced the perimeter, a silent sentinel. The isolation was maddening, but the fear was worse. Derek was out there. The lie hadn't worked. On the evening of the 2nd day, the heavy wooden door of the cabin opened. Elias walked in. Harper stood up from the sofa, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She had expected him to look immaculate, as always, but he didn't. He was missing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up. His hair was disheveled, and his right hand was wrapped in a crude, bloody handkerchief. There was a dark, feral energy radiating from him. The polished businessman was gone. The enforcer had returned. "Miller, wait outside," Elias said. His voice was a harsh rasp. The door shut. They were alone. Harper couldn't tear her eyes away from the blood soaking through the cloth on his hand. "What happened? Are you okay?" Elias walked heavily to the kitchen island and poured a glass of whiskey from a decanter. He downed it in one swallow, wincing slightly. "The problem has been resolved," he said, keeping his back to her. Harper's stomach plummeted. Resolved. It was a sterile corporate word for something brutal. "What did you do, Elias?" He turned around. His blue eyes were entirely black in the dim light of the cabin. "He cornered your friend Sarah in an alley behind the casino," Elias said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He had a knife. He wanted the address of the penthouse. My men were watching her. They intervened." Harper covered her mouth with her hand, a sob tearing from her throat. "Is Sarah—" "She's fine, not a scratch," Elias assured her quickly, a flash of humanity cutting through his cold exterior. "I had my people put her up in a hotel out of town and wired her enough money to start over wherever she wants." "And Derek?" Harper whispered. She was terrified to ask, but she had to know. Elias looked down at his bloody, wrapped hand. "He won't be looking for you anymore. He won't be looking for anyone." The finality in his words hung in the air, thick and metallic. Derek was dead. The monster who had haunted her for 2 years, who had cracked her ribs and poisoned her mind, was simply gone, erased from the board. Harper didn't feel relief. She felt a crushing, hollow weight. She had wanted to escape Derek, but she hadn't wanted this. She looked at Elias. She saw the blood on his knuckles. He had done it. Or he had ordered it. The devil had collected his due. Elias watched her face, reading the horror in her eyes. His jaw tightened. "This is the reality of my world, Harper," Elias said, his voice hard. "You wanted a shield. I am a weapon. Weapons don't gently ask threats to go away. They destroy them. If you cannot look at me now, then Miller will drive you to the bus station. You're free. The debt is paid." He turned away from her, walking towards the sink to unwrap his bloody hand. Harper stood frozen in the center of the room. The door was right there. She had a bag packed. Derek was dead. She could leave. She could run. She looked at Elias's broad back. He was running his injured hand under the cold tap water, his shoulders tense. He was waiting for the sound of the door opening. He expected her to leave. He expected her to see him as the monster everyone claimed he was. Harper took a breath. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced them to move. She didn't walk to the door. She walked to the kitchen. She opened the first aid kit resting on the counter. She pulled out the antiseptic, the gauze, and the medical tape. She stepped up beside Elias at the sink. He froze, his head turning sharply to look down at her. Harper didn't say a word. She reached out, her small, steady hands taking his large, battered one. She pulled it gently away from the running water. His knuckles were split open, angry and raw, bruised purple and black. She poured the antiseptic onto a cotton pad. "This is going to sting," she said quietly. Elias didn't flinch as she pressed the alcohol to his torn skin. He didn't move at all. He just stared down at her, his chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths, as Harper carefully wrapped the clean white gauze around his hand, securing it with tape. The silence between them shifted. The cynical walls she had built around herself began to crack, right down the middle. "You didn't have to do it yourself," she murmured, her thumb brushing over the back of his wrist. "He put his hands on what is mine," Elias replied, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. "I don't delegate that kind of reckoning." Harper looked up. The physical distance between them was practically non-existent. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were burning. He lifted his uninjured hand. For a second she thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, his hand dropped, settling firmly, possessively onto her waist. The touch changed everything. It wasn't a performance for the casino. It wasn't a show for a politician. It was a raw, undeniable claim in an empty room, heavy with the metallic scent of blood and survival. Harper closed her eyes, leaning into the warmth of his palm, finally accepting the truth she had been fighting since the moment she met him. She was never going to run again. The silence in the cabin was total, heavy enough to crack ice. Elias didn't move. His hand remained anchored on her waist, his thumb resting just above the curve of her hip. The heat radiating from his palm bled through the thin cotton of her shirt. Harper stood, perfectly still, her breathing shallow. She stared at the stark, white gauze wrapped around his bruised knuckles, the sharp contrast against his olive skin pulling her focus. He had killed a man tonight. She waited for the revulsion. She waited for the moral panic, the crushing weight of a life extinguished on her behalf. She searched her chest for the familiar, suffocating anxiety that had dictated her every waking moment for the past 2 years. It wasn't there. Instead, There was a hollow, echoing quiet. The phantom ache in her ribs, the one Derek had left her with, finally stopped throbbing. The monster was dead. The man standing in front of her had ended the threat, not with a plea, not with a restraining order that would be ignored, but with absolute, brutal finality. Elias slowly pulled his hand back. The sudden absence of his touch left the air feeling cold. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the floorboards, the adrenaline draining from his broad shoulders, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He walked past her, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, and sank into the worn leather armchair facing the dead fireplace. Harper remained by the sink for a long minute. She turned off the tap. The sound of the water cutting out made the room feel even smaller. She dried her hands on a dish towel, her mind turning over the jagged pieces of her new reality. She walked into the living space and picked up the whiskey decanter. She poured 2 fingers of the amber liquid into a clean glass and carried it over to him. Elias looked at the glass, then up at her. His icy blue eyes were bloodshot, the dark circles beneath them prominent in the dim yellow light of the cabin's single-floor lamp. He took the glass. His fingers brushed hers. Rough, calloused. "You should sleep," Elias said. His voice was gravel, stripped of its usual commanding resonance. "Miller will drive us back to the city at dawn." Harper didn't walk away. She lowered herself onto the edge of the coffee table directly across from him. Their knees were inches apart. "I'm not tired," she said. Elias took a slow sip of the whiskey. The harsh liquor didn't make him wince. He leaned his head against the back of the chair, studying her with a clinical, quiet intensity. "You aren't asking the questions you should be asking," Elias noted. "Like how you did it?" Harper asked, her voice flat. "Like where the body is, like who else knows, like whether or not the police will come knocking on the penthouse door by Friday." Elias set the glass on the side table with a dull thud. "Normal people ask those questions, Harper. I haven't been normal in a very long time," she replied. She rested her elbows on her knees, leaning forward. "Derek taught me that the law only protects people who can afford good lawyers. If I went to the cops, they would have taken a report and told me to call back if he actually stabbed me. I know how the system works, and I know you don't operate inside it. So no, I don't care where the body is. I only care that he can't get back up." Elias's jaw tightened. A muscle ticked near his ear. He saw the cold, cynical truth in her eyes, recognizing the shared, ugly understanding of a world that ate the weak. "He begged," Elias said softly. It was a confession, torn from somewhere deep and buried. Harper froze. "When he realized who I was, when he realized why I was standing in that alley," Elias continued, his gaze unfocusing, locking onto the empty stone fireplace. "He dropped the knife. He fell to his knees. He offered to leave the state. He offered to pay me. He offered you." Harper's stomach twisted. The nausea finally hit, a sudden violent surge of acid in her throat. "He offered you." Derek bargaining with her life to save his own skin, right up until the final second. "I wanted you to know that," Elias said, finally looking back at her. The lethal, terrifying enforcer was entirely present in his eyes. "I wanted you to know exactly the kind of coward you were running from. And I wanted you to know why I didn't stop hitting him when he went down." The room spun, just a fraction. Harper gripped the edges of the coffee table, grounding herself. She looked at the blood seeping faintly through the first layer of gauze on his knuckles. He hadn't just eliminated a threat. He had executed a punishment. He had taken her pain, internalized it, and returned it to the source with interest. Harper stood up. Her legs felt unsteady, but her mind was entirely clear. She closed the small distance between them, stepping between his parted knees. She reached out, her hands framing his face. His skin was rough with evening stubble, warm and rigid with tension. Elias went perfectly still, his breath hitched, a microscopic break in his iron control. "Thank you," Harper whispered. She didn't kiss him. It wasn't the time for it. The air was too thick with violence and survival. But she pressed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. Elias didn't hesitate this time. His arms came up, heavy and solid, wrapping around her waist. He pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held her with a desperate, crushing grip, as if she were the only tether keeping him from slipping entirely into the dark. They stayed like that until the rain started to fall, beating a steady, rhythmic drum against the tin roof of the cabin. The drive back to the city was different. The suffocating tension that had defined their previous rides was gone, replaced by a functional, heavy silence. The silver sedan cut through the morning fog, the city skyline slowly rising on the horizon like a jagged row of grey teeth. Harper sat in the back, a duffel bag at her feet. Elias sat beside her. He was back in a fresh suit, the cuffs hiding the bandages on his hand. He was on his phone, typing terse, rapid messages. Business didn't stop for a body in an alley. When they pulled into the underground garage of the penthouse, Miller finally spoke. "Mr. Reed called the secondary line this morning, boss," Miller said, putting the car in park. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. "He requested a sit-down at the Continental, 8 o'clock tonight." Elias stopped typing. The screen of his phone went dark. "Did he state a grievance?" Elias asked. "No, sir. Just said it was a matter of community interest." Elias slipped the phone into his jacket pocket. "Acknowledge the meeting. Tell him I'll be there." Harper caught the shift in the air. The cold, calculated predator had returned to Elias's features. She followed him into the private elevator, watching the numbers climb. "Who is Mr. Reed?" she asked. "Sullivan Reed," Elias said, loosening his tie. "He runs the docks on the east side. He's old blood. He inherited his seat at the table from his father, which means he demands respect without having bled for it. Why does he want to meet?" The elevator chimed. The doors slid open to the sprawling, sunlit penthouse. It looked exactly the same, but stepping inside, Harper didn't feel like a prisoner anymore. "Because a man died in my territory last night without my explicit public authorization," Elias said, walking toward the kitchen to pour a glass of water. "The syndicate keeps the peace through bureaucracy. If I kill a street-level thug, they don't care about the thug. They care that I didn't file the paperwork. Reed will use it to test for weakness. He wants to see if I'm slipping." Harper dropped her bag by the sofa. She thought about the previous week, the gallery opening, the heavy hand on her waist for all the politicians to see. "He's going to use me," Harper said softly. Elias stopped with the glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at her over the rim. "I'm the anomaly," she continued, her voice gaining strength. She walked toward the island, mirroring his position. "For years, you've been the untouchable ghost. Then, I show up. 2 days later, a man connected to my past ends up dead. Reed isn't stupid. He's going to connect the dots. He's going to see me as your blind spot." Elias set the glass down. "He won't touch you. You won't be there." "Yes, I will." The words hung between them, sharp and uncompromising. Elias's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a casino floor, Harper," Elias warned, his voice dropping to that dangerous, gravelly register. "Sullivan Reed is a viper. He deals in extortion and human trafficking. If you walk into a room with him, you paint a target on your own back that I cannot easily erase. The target is already there," Harper countered, leaning against the marble counter. She refused to back down. "If you hide me away in this penthouse, it proves I'm a weakness. It proves you're afraid to lose me. If I walk in there beside you, it proves I'm a choice. I'm part of the armor." Elias stared at her. The muscle in his jaw worked furiously. He was a man used to absolute obedience. People didn't argue with Elias Mercer. They nodded and prayed he didn't change his mind. He walked around the island, stopping inches from her. He looked down, studying the fierce, unyielding set of her shoulders, the hard glint in her eyes. The bruised, terrified girl from the rookery was gone. Elias reached out, his uninjured hand sliding around the back of her neck, his fingers tangling into the hair at the base of her skull. He tilted her head up. "You wear black," Elias ordered softly. "You don't speak unless addressed, and you do not leave my side for a single second. Understood?" "Understood." At 7:45 p.m. they walked into the Continental. It was a private dining club, wrapped in dark mahogany and dim, oppressive wealth. The air smelled of roasted duck and ancient Scotch. Miller flanked them, his massive presence a silent warning to anyone who looked too closely. Sullivan Reed was waiting in a private booth at the back of the room. He was a man in his late 50s, dressed in a sharp, silver-grey suit. He had a thin, patrician face and eyes that constantly darted around the room, assessing threats. 2 guards stood behind him. Reed smiled as Elias approached, showing entirely too many teeth. "Elias, good of you to come," Reed said smoothly. He didn't stand up. His eyes immediately shifted to Harper. The smile widened into something toxic. "And you brought a guest. How modern." "Reed," Elias said, his voice stripped of any warmth. Elias didn't wait for an invitation. He slid into the curved leather booth. Harper slid in right beside him. True to form, Elias's arm immediately draped across the back of the booth, his hand dropping to rest heavily on her waist. The claim was public. It was a line drawn in the sand. "So," Reed began, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It seems we had a minor sanitation issue in the alleys yesterday. One of the local bookies lost a client. Nasty business. A street rat with a knife." Elias said flatly. "He drew a weapon near one of my establishments. I had the trash taken out. It isn't a syndicate concern, Sullivan." "Ah, but it is, Elias." Reed tutted, leaning forward. He placed his elbows on the table. "The rat in question had debts and a rather loud, unfortunate history with a certain waitress." Reed looked directly at Harper. His gaze was violating, stripping her down to her core. "Tell me, my dear," Reed said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is a dead ex-boyfriend the going rate for a spot in Elias Mercer's bed these days? Or did you have to offer something extra?" The air in the booth turned to liquid nitrogen. Elias's hand tightened on Harper's waist, his fingers digging into her ribs. His other hand, the bruised one, rested on the table, the knuckles turning white. Harper knew, with absolute certainty, that Elias was a breath away from drawing a weapon in the middle of a crowded restaurant. Harper reached out beneath the table. She placed her hand firmly over Elias's thigh, silently commanding him to hold. She looked at Sullivan Reed. She didn't flinch. She used the same dead-eyed, cynical stare she used on men who groped her at the baccarat tables. "Mr. Reed," Harper said. Her voice was steady, perfectly modulated, carrying over the low hum of the restaurant. "I spent 2 years watching men bluff with bad hands. I know the tells." Reed raised an eyebrow, amused but slightly irritated by her insolence. "Is that right?" "It is," Harper continued. She leaned slightly forward, breaking Elias's protective shadow just enough to claim her own space. "A man with a winning hand doesn't need to try and humiliate the dealer. He just plays his cards. You called this meeting to talk about an unpaid debt from a dead street rat. But you're sweating, Mr. Reed. Your guards are watching the door, not us, and you haven't touched your drink." Reed's smile vanished. "You're not here to test, Elias," Harper stated, hitting the nail with absolute, terrifying precision. "You're bleeding territory on the East Docks, and you want Elias to back your claim at the syndicate meeting tomorrow. You're trying to leverage a dead body to get a favor." The silence that followed was suffocating. Reed's face flushed an ugly, mottled red. His guards shifted uneasily. Harper sat back, leaning into the solid wall of Elias's chest. She didn't say another word. Elias didn't look at Reed. He looked at Harper. The expression on his face was one of dark, unholy pride. It was the look of a man who had just watched his queen take a knight off the board. Elias slowly turned his gaze back to Reed. The amusement was gone. The executioner had returned. "My partner," Elias said, the word ringing like a gunshot, "has made a very astute observation, Sullivan. Your docks are leaking cargo. You want my votes." She speaks out of turn! Reed hissed, recovering a fraction of his bravado. She speaks for me, Elias countered, his voice a low, lethal hum. And she is right. You have nothing to leverage. The matter of the alley is closed. If you want my support at the table tomorrow, it will cost you 20% of your Eastern shipments. Take it, or the syndicate will strip you of the docks by Friday. Reed stared at Elias, his jaw working furiously. He looked at the bruised knuckles resting on the table. He did the math. 10%! Reed choked out. 20. Elias said softly. Before I decide to make it 30? Reed swallowed hard. He gave a sharp, jerky nod. Fine, 20. Elias didn't smile. He simply slid out of the booth. He offered his hand to Harper. She took it, stepping out beside him. Enjoy your dinner, Sullivan, Elias said. They walked out of the restaurant, Miller trailing behind them. The valet brought the car around immediately. No one spoke until the doors of the sedan closed, sealing them in the quiet darkness of the back seat. The adrenaline crash hit Harper the moment the private elevator doors opened into the penthouse. Her hands started to shake. She had just insulted a cartel boss to his face. She had inserted herself into syndicate politics. She had crossed a line that no amount of scrubbing could ever wash clean. She walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. They blurred slightly in her vision. Elias stood in the center of the room. He took off his suit jacket, tossing it over the back of the sofa. He unholstered the matte black firearm from his shoulder rig, placing it deliberately on the coffee table. The heavy thud echoed in the silent room. You played a dangerous game tonight, Elias said. His voice wasn't angry. It was heavy. I won, Harper replied, keeping her back to him. You guessed, he corrected her, walking slowly across the room until he was standing directly behind her. His presence was a physical weight. If you had been wrong, Reed would have demanded your head for the insult. I would have had to kill him and his men right there in the dining room, starting a war that would have burned this city to the ground. Harper closed her eyes. Would you have? Yes. The word was immediate, unflinching. Harper turned around. Elias was standing inches away. The mask of the cold, calculated businessman was completely gone. His blue eyes were fractured, raw with a possessive, terrifying intensity. I don't want a prop, Harper, Elias said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. I don't want a shield, and I don't want a stray. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. He held it out to her. There is $200,000 in cash in here, Elias stated. A new passport, a clean social security number. The driver is downstairs. He will take you to the private airfield. You get on the plane, you pick a city, and you vanish. Derek is dead. You are free. Harper stared at the envelope. It was everything she had fought for. It was the bus ticket out of town, magnified 1,000 times over. It was a blank slate. Why are you giving me this? She asked, her voice trembling. Because what happened tonight proved you belong in this world, Elias said, his jaw tight. And this world is a meat grinder. If you stay, you are mine, completely. There is no walking away. There is no going back to serving drinks or pretending you are normal. You will be hunted. You will be feared. You will sit beside a devil for the rest of your life. He pushed the envelope closer to her chest. So take it, Elias ordered softly. Take it and run, little bird, before the cage locks. Harper looked at the man in front of her. She saw the bruised knuckles that had beaten a monster to death for her. She saw the rigid tension in his shoulders, a man bracing for the impact of a loss he had orchestrated himself. He was giving her a choice. Derek had never given her a choice. Derek had taken. Elias was offering. Harper reached up. She didn't take the envelope. Instead, she placed her hands flat against his chest, right over his heart. It was beating a slow, heavy, steady rhythm. I'm done running, Harper said. She pushed the envelope out of his hand. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft smack, the cash and the fake identity forgotten. Elias let out a ragged breath, the sound tearing through the quiet room. In a flash of motion, his hands locked onto her waist. The grip was absolute iron, bruising and desperate. He lifted her effortlessly, backing her up against the cold glass of the window. Harper gasped as the breath was knocked out of her, but she didn't fight him. She tangled her hands into his hair, pulling him down. When his mouth crashed down on hers, it was a collision. There was nothing gentle about it. It was a desperate, territorial branding. Harper kissed him back with equal ferocity, pouring 2 years of fear, survival, and suppressed rage into the contact. Their teeth clashed. The taste of scotch and danger flooded her senses. Elias's hands roamed from her waist, tracing the line of her spine, pulling her impossibly closer. He kissed her like a man starved, like a man who had finally found the one thing in the world he couldn't buy, coerce, or steal. Harper broke the kiss, gasping for air. She rested her forehead against his chin, her chest heaving. "No more ledgers," Harper whispered fiercely into the quiet room. "No more transactions. If I stay, it's 50-50. I'm not behind you. I'm beside you." Elias looked down at her. His eyes were dark, burning with a lethal devotion that would terrify a sane woman. "Beside me," Elias agreed, his voice a gravelly vow. He pulled her back into his chest, burying his face in her hair. The city glittered beneath them, a sprawling kingdom of corruption, violence, and greed. Harper looked out at the lights. She wasn't a cornered rat anymore. The monster was dead. And as the devil's hand settled heavily, permanently, back onto her waist, Harper realized she had finally found home. Did Harper make the ultimate mistake? Or did she finally take control of her own destiny? When the line between protector and captor blurs, surviving the underworld requires paying a price in blood. If you couldn't tear your eyes away from Harper and Elias's dark, dangerous romance, smash that like button right now. Want more gritty, high-stakes mafia drama where the villains are the only ones who can save you? Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your fellow romance addicts. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken the money or stayed with the devil?